The summer heat shimmered across the Nebraska plains, turning the waving grass into a golden sea that stretched to the horizon. But Willow Walters couldn't appreciate its beauty as she collapsed onto her knees, her body racked with sobs that seemed to rise from the deepest part of her soul. Her hands trembled as they cradled her swollen belly, the child within kicking against the confines of her womb as if sensing its mother's distress. The wagon that had carried her west, that had promised to deliver her to a new life, was now nothing more than a diminishing dust cloud on the horizon, taking with it the man who had vowed to love her until death parted them. It was 1873, and Willow had believed in promises. She had believed in Thomas when he'd spoken of California's golden opportunities, when he'd painted pictures of their future homestead with his silver tongue. She had believed him right up until the moment he'd ordered her from the wagon, claiming her conditions slowed their progress, that he couldn't afford to miss the land rush waiting for no man, certainly not one burdened with a wife heavy with child. "We will die out here," she whispered to the endless prairie, one hand shielding her eyes from the merciless sun. Her wedding band caught the light, a cruel reminder of vows so easily broken. 22 years old and abandoned, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bundle Thomas had tossed down after her. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Willow doubled over with a gasp that was half pain, half desperate prayer. The contractions had started that morning, part of the reason Thomas had deemed her too burdensome to keep. She hadn't told him, knowing what it might mean. Now, alone in the vast emptiness, that decision seemed foolish beyond measure. "Please," she begged, unsure if she was addressing God or the unforgiving land itself. "Please." The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, so faint at first she thought it might be her heart pounding against her ribs, but the rhythm was steady, growing louder with each passing second. Willow raised her head, tears blurring her vision as she strained to see through the golden haze. A dark silhouette materialized, a lone rider atop a chestnut stallion that seemed to float above the grass. The man's broad-brimmed hat shadowed his features, but she could make out the strong line of his shoulders, the confident set of his spine as he guided his mount toward her with expert ease. "Madam." His voice reached her before he did, deep and resonant, carrying a note of concern that made her chest tighten. "Madam, are you hurt?" When he drew closer, Willow could see his face tanned by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a clear winter sky. His expression shifted from concern to alarm as he took in her condition, her tear-streaked face, the desperate grip of her fingers against her abdomen. "The baby," she managed to say, another contraction robbing her of breath. "It's coming." Without hesitation, the stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He knelt beside her, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of burnished copper, tied back at the nape of his neck. "I'm Owen Vaughn," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here. You're in no condition to travel far, but we need to get you out of this sun." His eyes scanned the empty horizon. "Were you traveling alone, madam?" Willow closed her eyes against a fresh wave of shame and grief. "My husband, he left me." Said I was slowing him down. The muscle in Owen's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Can you tell me your name?" "Willow Walters." Another contraction seized her, and she couldn't suppress a cry of pain. Owen's hand found hers, strong and calloused but infinitely careful. "Mrs. Walters, I need to get you somewhere safe. That baby isn't waiting for proper introductions." He glanced at her swollen belly, then back to her face. "I'm going to lift you onto my horse. It won't be comfortable, but it's better than delivering your child in this field with nothing but prairie grass for a blanket." Before she could respond, he had gathered her small bundle of possessions and secured it to his saddle. Then he turned back to her, his movements deliberate and respectful. "I'm going to pick you up now," he warned, and Willow nodded, too exhausted and frightened to protest. His arms slid beneath her, one supporting her back, the other under her knees, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The sudden shift in position intensified the pain, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Easy now," Owen murmured, his breath warm against her hair as he settled her on his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securing her against his chest while the other took the reins. "I've got you, Mrs. Walters, and your little one too." As they began to move, the rhythm of the horse's gait a torturous counterpoint to her contractions, Willow felt Owen lean close to her ear. "I promise you shelter and safety," he said, the words a solemn vow that cut through her fear. "Both of you." She wanted to thank him, to acknowledge the lifeline he'd thrown to her when all hope seemed lost, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. The last thing Willow registered before unconsciousness claimed her was the steady beat of Owen's heart against her back, as reliable as a promise made in blood. Owen felt the exact moment Willow Walters went limp in his arms. His body tensed, instinctively tightening his hold to keep her secure as brimstone. His chestnut stallion maintained a careful pace across the rolling prairie. 5 miles had never seemed so far. "Hold on, Mrs. Walters," he urged, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Her face was pale beneath its sunburn, her breathing shallow. The swell of her belly pressed against his arm, and he could feel the child within moving restlessly. Just a little further. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly as they crested a gentle rise, and the Broken Spur Ranch finally came into view, a modest homestead with a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, and several outbuildings surrounded by split-rail fencing. Smoke curled from the chimney, a welcome sight that meant Flora was keeping the hearth. Owen urged Brimstone into a canter, mindful of his precious cargo. As they approached the yard, he called out, his voice carrying across the open space. "Flora, need help here." The door to the house swung open, and a stout woman with iron-gray hair appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Owen carrying an unconscious pregnant woman. "Lord above, what have you brought home now, Owen Vaughn?" she exclaimed, already hurrying down the steps. "Found her abandoned in Peterson's South Field," Owen explained as he carefully dismounted, still cradling Willow. "Husband left her behind, baby's coming." Flora's expression hardened at his words, but her hands were gentle as she helped guide Willow from the horse. "Bring her inside, quickly. I'll need hot water and clean linens." Owen carried Willow into the house, following Flora up the stairs to the spare bedroom. The room was simple but comfortable, with a large bed covered in one of Flora's hand-stitched quilts, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. "Lay her down easy," Flora instructed, already pulling back the covers. "Then make yourself scarce. This is women's business now." Owen placed Willow on the bed with all the care he'd use handling newborn lambs in spring. As he straightened, Willow's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear evident in their hazel depths. "Where?" she began, her voice barely audible. "You're at the Broken Spur Ranch," Owen told her, stepping back to allow Flora access. "This is Flora Jenkins, my housekeeper. She's delivered half the babies in the county. You're in good hands." Flora snorted at that. "Flattery won't keep you in this room, boy. Out with you now. Boil water and bring up the basin and my birthing kit from the pantry." Owen hesitated, strangely reluctant to leave. Willow's gaze had latched onto his as if he were a lifeline in a stormy sea. "You'll be all right, Mrs. Walters," he assured her, tipping his hat. Flora's bark is worse than her bite. A ghost of a smile touched Willow's lips before another contraction seized her, transforming her expression into a mask of pain. Owen retreated, closing the door on Flora's efficiency and Willow's stifled cries. Downstairs, he busied himself with the tasks Flora had assigned, setting water to boil on the cook stove and retrieving the birthing supplies. The small leather case contained scissors, clean twine, various bottles of Flora's herbal remedies, and several squares of bleached muslin. Owen handled it with reverence, knowing how many lives had begun under its watch. As he worked, his mind returned to the field where he'd found Willow. He'd been riding fence lines, checking for breaks after the recent thunderstorm, when he'd spotted her a splash of blue calico against the tawny grass. At first, he'd thought her another victim of Indian raids or bandit attacks, not uncommon in these parts despite the increasing settlement. The discovery that she'd been deliberately abandoned by her own husband had ignited a slow, burning fury in his gut. What kind of man left his pregnant wife alone on the open prairie? It was a death sentence, plain and simple. Had Owen not happened by, both mother and child would likely have perished under the merciless summer sun or fallen prey to the various dangers that stalked the night. A particularly sharp cry from upstairs pulled him from his dark thoughts. Owen winced, setting the kettle to boil and gathering clean towels from the linen press. He'd faced down rustlers and survived the war between the states, but the sounds of a woman in childbirth made him feel utterly helpless. He carried the supplies upstairs, knocking softly on the bedroom door. Flora opened it just wide enough to take the items, her sleeve rolled up and a determined set to her mouth. "It's coming fast," she informed him. "First babies usually take their time, but this one's in a hurry to meet the world. Make up a pallet for yourself in the barn tonight." "This room's spoken for." Owen nodded, accepting the dismissal, but before Flora could close the door, he caught a glimpse of Willow. She was propped against the pillows, her hair a dark cascade against the white linen, her face flushed with exertion. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Owen found himself raising a hand in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "Remember what I promised," he called to her. "Shelter and safety for both of you." Flora shut the door in his face, but not before he saw Willow nod, her expression a mixture of pain, fear, and something that might have been gratitude. Left alone in the hallway, Owen removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of the dust and sweat from a day's work. He should see to Brimstone, check the evening chores, perhaps clean up before the baby arrived. Instead, he found himself sinking down to sit on the top step of the staircase, hat in his hands, settling in for what promised to be a long vigil. He hadn't planned on bringing home a pregnant woman and her soon-to-be-born child when he'd ridden out that morning, but life on the frontier rarely followed a man's plans. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and purple, Owen Vaughn waited, listening to the sounds of new life struggling to enter the world, and wondered what tomorrow would bring to the broken spur. The night deepened around the broken spur, stars pricking the vast canvas of sky like distant lanterns. Owen had moved from his position on the stairs only long enough to check on the livestock and secure the property for the night. Now he sat on the porch, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, ears straining for any sound from the upstairs bedroom. The cries had stopped some time ago, replaced by a silence that stretched his nerves taut. Just as he was about to risk Flora's wrath by checking on the situation, the door behind him creaked open. "It's a girl," Flora announced, her voice soft with fatigue but unmistakably pleased. "Healthy lungs on that one, though she's finally settled down. Mother's resting now." Owen stood, setting aside his cup. "They're both well," Flora's weathered face creased in a smile. "As well as can be expected. Mrs. Walters lost a fair amount of blood, but she's strong. She'll need time to recover properly." She fixed him with a pointed look. "Which means she'll be our guest for a while." "Of course," Owen agreed immediately. "She'll stay as long as she needs." Flora studied him in the dim light cast by the lantern hanging from the porch beam. That husband of hers, abandoning a woman in her condition. Some men deserve to be dragged behind a wild horse. Owen's jaw tightened. "If I ever cross paths with him, I might arrange that." HMPH. "Violence won't help that young woman now. What she needs is rest, nourishment, and peace to bond with her child." Flora wiped her hands on her apron, a habit even when they were already clean. "She's asking for you." That caught him by surprise. "For me. Says she wants to thank you properly. I told her it could wait till morning, but she's as stubborn as she is pretty." Flora's expression softened. "Just keep it brief. She needs her sleep." Owen nodded, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance, dusty clothes, day-old stubble rough on his chin, but there was no helping it now. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to tame it, and stepped into the house. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a soft glow emanating from within. Owen knocked gently before pushing it open further. Willow Walters lay propped against the pillows, her dark hair braided neatly over one shoulder, her face pale but serene in the lamplight. In her arms, wrapped in one of Flora's carefully preserved baby blankets, was a tiny bundle. Owen's breath caught at the sight. "Mr. Vaughn," Willow greeted him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please come in." Owen stepped into the room, feeling oversized and awkward among the delicate scene before him. He kept his distance, stopping at the foot of the bed. "Mrs. Walters, Flora says you and the little one are doing well." A smile touched Willow's lips, transforming her tired face. "Thanks to you both. If you hadn't found us when you did." She trailed off, then took a steadying breath. "I wanted to thank you properly and to introduce you." She shifted the bundle slightly. "This is Eleanor Grace Walters." Owen moved closer, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. The infant's face was tiny and perfect, flushed pink with new life. A wisp of dark hair peeked from beneath the blanket, and as he watched, the baby's eyes opened unfocused but strikingly alert. "She's beautiful," he said, meaning it. "Like her mother." The compliment brought color to Willow's cheeks. "You're too kind, Mr. Vaughn." "Owen, please." "Owen," she echoed, testing the name, "and I'm Willow. After what you've done for us, formality seems unnecessary." He nodded, understanding the gift of familiarity she was offering. "Willow, then." "And little Eleanor." He extended a tentative finger, which the baby immediately grasped with surprising strength. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. Strong grip. "She'll be handling the reins in no time." Willow's smile faded slightly. "I don't know what we'll be doing." "I had no plans beyond following Thomas to California." Her voice caught on her husband's name. "I never imagined I'd be on my own with a newborn in the middle of Nebraska territory." Owen carefully extracted his finger from Eleanor's grip. "You're not on your own, not anymore." The words came easily, a reaffirmation of the promise he'd made in that sun-baked field. "The broken spur isn't much, but there's room for you both here until you decide what you want to do next." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, and Owen felt a moment of panic. He'd never been good with crying women. "Forgive me," she said, blinking rapidly. "It's just, the kindness of strangers wasn't something I counted on. Thomas always said people out west were hard, that we could only rely on ourselves." "Some are hard," Owen conceded. "Life out here can make or break a person, but we look after our own." He cleared his throat. "And right now, that includes you and Eleanor." Willow looked down at her daughter, then back at Owen. "Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything." It was a fair question, one Owen had asked himself as he'd carried her home. The answer came from a place deeper than thought. "My mother died in childbirth when I was 10, he said quietly. "Out on a homestead not unlike this one. No doctor for 50 miles, no neighbors close enough to help. My father did what he could, but—" He shook his head, the memory still raw despite the years. "The baby died too, a little brother I never got to know. After that, my father was never the same, drank himself to death within 2 years. Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes. "I'm so sorry." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the sympathy. "It was a long time ago, but when I found you today, I couldn't help thinking of her. What might have happened if someone had been there for her when she needed help most." Willow reached out, her hand finding his where it rested on the bedpost. Her touch was light but steady. "Thank you for being there for us." The moment stretched between them, a fragile connection forged in crisis. Then Eleanor stirred with a tiny mewling sound and the spell broke. "I should let you rest," Owen said, stepping back. "Flora will have my hide if I tire you out," Willow nodded, settling Eleanor more comfortably in her arms. "Tomorrow, perhaps you could tell me more about the broken spur. If we're to be guests here, I'd like to know about our temporary home." "I'd be happy to," Owen agreed, moving toward the door. "Sleep well, Willow." "Eleanor." As he closed the door behind him, Owen was struck by the strange feeling that his lonely ranch had suddenly, unexpectedly become a home. Dawn broke over the broken spur with the soft persistence of Nebraska summers, pale gold light filtering through the curtains of the upstairs bedroom. Willow woke to the unfamiliar weight of her daughter against her chest, Eleanor's tiny form rising and falling with each breath. For a moment, Willow simply marveled at her existence, this perfect creature who had journeyed with her through abandonment and despair to find safety in a stranger's home. The events of the previous day seemed dreamlike in their intensity. Thomas's cold dismissal, the terror of impending childbirth alone on the prairie, Owen Vaughn's timely arrival, and the arduous delivery under Flora's capable hands. Now, in the quiet of morning, reality began to settle around her like dust after a storm. She was a mother. She was abandoned. She was dependent on the charity of a man she'd known for less than a day. The weight of these truths threatened to overwhelm her until Eleanor stirred, her small face scrunching before relaxing again in sleep. Willow traced a finger along her daughter's cheek, marveling at the softness. "We'll find our way," she whispered to her child. Somehow, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Flora entered carrying a tray laden with a steaming bowl, fresh bread, and a pot of tea. "Good morning, Mrs. Walters," the older woman greeted her, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I've brought you some breakfast, nothing fancy, just porridge with honey and some chamomile tea, good for bringing in your milk." Willow smiled gratefully. "You're very kind, Mrs. Jenkins." "Flora, please, we don't stand on ceremony much at the Broken Spur." She busied herself opening the curtains wider, letting in more of the morning light. "How's our little miss this morning?" "Sleeping peacefully," Willow reported, shifting slightly to accept the bowl Flora offered. "She fed well during the night," Flora nodded approvingly. "Good sign that. Some babes take time to figure out nursing, but sounds like your Eleanor's a quick study." She paused, watching as Willow took a tentative spoonful of porridge. "Owen's already been out since before dawn, seeing to the chores. That man works harder than 3 normal fellows put together." Willow swallowed, the simple food tasting better than anything she could remember. "He seems very dedicated to his ranch." "Built it from nothing, he did," Flora confirmed, a note of pride in her voice. "Came back from the war with nothing but scars and nightmares, used his soldier's pay to buy this land when nobody else wanted it. 5 years of backbreaking work, and now he's got one of the more prosperous spreads in the county." She straightened a wrinkle in the bed covers. "Not that you'd know it to look at him. Man still mends his own shirts and rides the same saddle he started with." Willow absorbed this information, adding it to the brief glimpse Owen had given her of his past. He mentioned losing his mother and brother when he was young. Flora's expression softened. "Ah, he told you that, did he? Not something he shares with many," she sighed. "Changed him, that did. He was just a boy, but he had to grow up quick after. By the time the war came, he was already carrying more weight than most men twice his age." "Which side did he fight for?" Willow asked, curious despite herself. "The Union," Flora replied, "though he doesn't talk about it much. Says there was no glory in it, just blood and loss on both sides." She shook her head. "But that's enough heavy talk for a new mother. You focus on healing and caring for that beautiful girl of yours. Owen says you're welcome to stay as long as you need." "I don't want to impose," Willow began, but Flora waved away her concern. "Nonsense. This house has been too quiet for too long. Besides, Owen could use someone besides me and the ranch hands to talk to. Man spends too much time with his cattle and horses." Before Willow could respond, Eleanor began to stir in earnest, her tiny fists waving as her face reddened with the effort of her cries. "Someone's hungry again," Flora observed with a smile. "I'll leave you to it. Just ring that bell on the table if you need anything. And don't worry about rushing to get up and about. Your body's been through an ordeal it needs time to mend." After Flora left, closing the door behind her, Willow attended to Eleanor's needs, marveling again at the natural connection between them. As her daughter nursed, Willow found her thoughts returning to Owen Vaughn. There was a steadiness to him that reminded her of the great oak that had stood outside her childhood home in Illinois, deep, rooted, and unshakable. Thomas had been all flash and charm, full of grand promises and sweeping gestures that had dazzled her 19-year-old self. But Owen's simple promise of shelter and safety already felt more substantial than all of Thomas's elaborate visions of their California paradise. "Your timing could have been better, little one," she murmured to Alina, "but perhaps your judgment was perfect. If you'd waited until California, who knows what would have become of us?" The thought of Thomas brought a fresh wave of hurt. They had been married barely a year, and while their courtship had been brief, she had believed wholeheartedly in his affection. How quickly that affection had soured when faced with the realities of the journey west and the responsibilities of impending fatherhood. Alina finished nursing and Willow adjusted her clothing before lifting her daughter to her shoulder, patting gently as Flora had shown her. The simple routine already felt natural, as if she'd been doing it all her life instead of less than a day. "We'll be all right," she told her daughter, needing to hear the words spoken aloud. "We're stronger than he knew." Whether she was referring to Thomas or to herself, Willow wasn't entirely sure. The morning passed slowly, measured in Alina's cycles of feeding and sleeping. Willow dozed intermittently, her body demanding rest to recover from the ordeal of childbirth. Around midday, Flora returned with a light meal and helped Willow to the washstand, where she was able to clean up properly for the first time since her ordeal began. "Owens asked if you'd feel up to joining him for supper this evening," Flora mentioned as she helped Willow into a clean nightgown, one of Flora's own, altered hastily to fit Willow's slighter frame. "Says he'd like to properly welcome you to the Broken Spur." "But only if you're feeling strong enough." Willow hesitated, torn between her desire to thank her host properly and her awareness of her still fragile state. "I'd like that," she decided finally. "Though I'm afraid I have nothing suitable to wear." Flora's eyes twinkled. "Leave that to me. I've raised 3 daughters of my own, and they've left plenty behind that might suit you. We'll find something that fits, never you fear." True to her word, Flora returned later with several dresses, explaining that her youngest daughter had left them behind when she'd married and moved to Omaha 2 years prior. Sarah was always on the slim side, even after her own babies, Flora said, laying the garments across the foot of the bed. "These might hang a bit loose on you now, but after childbearing, a woman's shape takes time to return. And with nursing, you'll want something that allows easy access." Willow blushed at the frank discussion, but appreciated the practical advice. After some consideration, she selected a simple dress of soft blue cotton, modest but pretty with its white lace collar and cuffs. "Perfect," Flora approved. "Brings out the color in your cheeks. Now let's see about doing something with that hair of yours." By the time the afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, Willow was dressed, her dark hair arranged in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Alina had been fed, changed, and swaddled in a fresh blanket, ready to join her mother for her first proper social engagement. "There," Flora said, stepping back to survey her handiwork. "You look lovely, dear. No one would guess you brought a new life into the world just yesterday." Willow doubted that was entirely true. She could feel the weakness in her limbs, the tenderness of her body, but the simple act of dressing and preparing to face the world again had restored a measure of her dignity. "Thank you, Flora," she said sincerely, "for everything." The older woman patted her hand. "It's nothing, child. Now shall we go downstairs? Owen's been pacing the kitchen for the last hour, though he'd deny it if you mentioned it." Willow gathered Alina carefully in her arms, took a deep breath, and nodded. "I'm ready." The journey downstairs was slow, with Flora hovering anxiously at her elbow, but Willow managed it without mishap. The main floor of the ranch house was comfortably appointed, with sturdy furniture that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, cold now in the summer heat, but clearly the heart of the home during winter months. Owen was waiting in the dining room, standing rather stiffly beside a table set with what appeared to be the ranch's best dishes. He'd cleaned up considerably since their last encounter, his copper hair damp and neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, and Willow felt a flicker of something unfamiliar beneath her breastbone. "Mrs. Walters," he greeted her, stepping forward. "Willow, you look remarkable." For someone who, he stopped, seemingly aware of the potential impropriety of referencing her recent delivery. For someone who was half dead in a field yesterday, she finished for him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Thank you, Owen, and thank you for inviting us to supper." He gestured to the table. "Please sit. Flora's been cooking up a storm all afternoon." "Nothing fancy," Flora protested as she bustled around them. "Just a proper welcome meal, roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and I managed to put up some early strawberry preserves last week." Owen held a chair for Willow, who settled into it carefully, arranging a leaner in the crook of her arm. The baby was awake but content, her eyes moving without focus around the unfamiliar surroundings. "She seems to be taking it all in stride," Owen observed, taking his own seat across from Willow. "She's remarkable," Willow agreed, gazing down at her daughter. "I keep expecting to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but when I look at her, everything else just settles." Owen nodded, a look of understanding crossing his features. "That's how it should be, I reckon. The important things make themselves clear in times of trouble." Flora served the meal with efficient grace, and for a time, conversation gave way to the simple pleasure of good food shared in comfortable company. Willow found herself relaxing by degrees, the tension of the past days easing from her shoulders. "I hope the room is comfortable," Owen said as they finished their meal. "If there's anything you need, you only have to ask." "It's perfect," Willow assured him. "Far more than I could have hoped for." She hesitated, then added, "Though I can't help feeling that I should be doing something to earn my keep. I'm not accustomed to idleness." Owen looked startled. "You've just had a baby, Willow. No one expects you to be doing chores." "Not immediately, of course," she clarified. "But once I've recovered my strength. My father raised me to believe that honest work is the foundation of dignity." A smile spread across Owen's face, warming his eyes. "A philosophy I share, but for now your job is to heal and care for Alina. There will be time enough for other contributions later, if that's what you wish." The "if" hung in the air between them, a gentle acknowledgement that her stay at the Broken Spur might be temporary, that she might choose to move on once she was able. Alina chose that moment to announce her displeasure with a series of increasingly insistent cries. Willow rose immediately, cradling her daughter close. "I should take her upstairs," she said apologetically. "Thank you for the lovely meal and for your hospitality." Owen stood as well, coming around the table to pull out her chair. "It was my pleasure. Perhaps tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I could show you around the ranch. Nothing strenuous, just a short walk around the yard." Willow nodded, oddly pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that very much." As she climbed the stairs, Alina's cries subsiding as she anticipated her next meal, Willow found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an eagerness that surprised her. The future remained uncertain, her heart still raw from Thomas's betrayal. But for the first time since he'd ordered her from the wagon, she felt a flicker of hope. The Broken Spur might be just a temporary refuge, but tonight it felt remarkably like a second chance. The following week passed in a rhythm of new motherhood that consumed most of Willow's waking hours. Alina proved to be a generally contented baby, but like all newborns, she required near constant attention, feeding, changing, soothing. Willow's world narrowed to the dimensions of the upstairs bedroom and the needs of her daughter. Owen, true to his word, had shown her around the immediate surroundings of the ranch house on her third day at the Broken Spur. The tour had been brief, mindful of her still recovering strength, but it had given Willow a better sense of her temporary home. The broken spur was modest by the standards of established Eastern farms, but impressive for a ranch built from nothing in the years following the war. Besides the main house, there was a substantial barn, a bunkhouse for the handful of cowhands Owen employed, a smokehouse, and various smaller outbuildings dedicated to the running of a working cattle operation. A kitchen garden flourished behind the house, lovingly tended by Flora, and a small orchard of young apple trees promised future harvests. "It's beautiful," Willow had told Owen sincerely as they stood on the porch, Alina sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You've created something remarkable here." A flush had crept up his neck at her praise. "It's a work in progress, always will be, I suspect." Now, a week after Alina's birth, Willow found herself restless for the first time. Her body was healing well, her strength returning more quickly than she'd anticipated. The bedroom that had initially seemed a haven now felt confining, and she longed for fresh air and a change of scenery. After Alina's morning feeding, Willow dressed them both with care. For herself, she chose another of the dresses Flora had provided, this one a soft green that complemented her dark hair. For Alina, she selected one of the tiny gowns Flora had mysteriously produced from a trunk in the attic, lovingly preserved baby clothes from her own children's infancy. "There you are, my sweet girl," Willow murmured as she wrapped Alina in a light blanket. "Shall we go exploring today? I think we've imposed on Flora's hospitality long enough without contributing to the household." Alina blinked up at her, her eyes increasingly alert and focused with each passing day. Willow chose to interpret this as agreement. Downstairs, she found Flora in the kitchen, up to her elbows in bread dough. The older woman looked up in surprise. "Well, look at you two. All dressed up and ready for adventure, it seems." Willow smiled. "I thought it was time we ventured beyond our room for more than meals. I was hoping I might help with some light chores. Nothing strenuous," she added, seeing Flora's expression. "Perhaps mending or shelling peas something I can do while sitting with Alina." Flora wiped her hands on her apron, studying Willow with a critical eye. "You are looking stronger, and I won't pretend there isn't plenty to be done around here." She gestured to a basket on the table. "Those green beans won't snap themselves if you're of a mind to help." "Perfect," Willow said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table and arranging Alina in her lap, the baby's back supported against her stomach. "This is exactly what I had in mind." For the next hour, Willow worked steadily, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple, repetitive task. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread, sunlight streaming through the windows to create pools of gold on the scrubbed wooden floor. Flora worked alongside her, their conversation flowing easily from childcare to cooking to the running of the ranch. "Owen's hired on 2 new hands for the season," Flora mentioned as she shaped loaves. "Young brothers from back east somewhere, greenhorns but eager to learn. Says they remind him of himself when he was starting out." "How many men work for him altogether?" Willow asked, genuinely curious about the operation of the ranch. 5 regulars, plus these 2 newcomers. Not a large outfit compared to some, but Owen's particular about who he hires. Says he'd rather have a few good men than a dozen lazy ones. Willow nodded, understanding the wisdom in this approach. "And they all live in the bunkhouse." "All except Hank," Flora said. "He's the foreman, been with Owen since the beginning, has a small cabin near the south pasture. Prefers his privacy, that one, but loyal as the day is long." The sound of boots on the porch interrupted their conversation. A moment later, Owen entered the kitchen, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He stopped short at the sight of Willow and Alina at the table. "Good morning," he greeted them, his surprise evident but not unwelcome. "This is a pleasant change." Willow felt a flush rise to her cheeks under his gaze. "I hope you don't mind. I was feeling restless and Flora kindly put me to work." "Mind, not at all." He hung his hat on a peg by the door and crossed to the wash basin to clean his hands. "It's good to see you up and about." "Owen Vaughn, don't you track mud onto my clean floor," Flora scolded, though there was no real heat in her tone. And wash up properly if you're planning to hold that baby, which I can see in your eyes you're itching to do." Owen looked chagrined but obediently scrubbed his hands more thoroughly. "May I?" he asked Willow, nodding toward Alina. Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course." She's just been fed and changed, so she should be in a pleasant mood. With a care that belied his size and strength, Owen lifted Alina from Willow's lap. His large hands cradled her tiny form with surprising confidence. "You seem practiced at this," Willow observed. "Helped deliver many a calf and foal," Owen replied, settling into a chair across from her, Alina secure in the crook of his arm. "The principles aren't so different." Flora snorted from her place at the stove. "Listen to him comparing a human child to livestock. Pay him no mind, Willow." But Willow wasn't offended. There was something endearing about the gentle way Owen held her daughter, the serious attention he paid to her every movement. "Hello there, Miss Alina," he said softly. "You're looking fine this morning, growing already, I'd wager." Alina's tiny hand escaped the blanket, waving in the air before latching onto Owen's finger with surprising strength. A smile transformed his face, softening the lines etched by sun and hard work. The sight stirred something unexpected in Willow's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat or the cooking fire. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that her situation was precarious, her future uncertain. Developing an attachment to Owen Vaughn or allowing him to develop one to Alina would only complicate matters when the time came for them to move on, and they would have to move on eventually. Wouldn't they? "I was thinking," Owen said, still watching Alina's face with fascination, "that if you're feeling up to it, you might like to join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow. Nothing formal, just the ranch hands and a few neighbors. Flora always puts on a spread, and it might do you good to meet some of the local folks." Willow's hands stilled on the green beans. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to intrude on your traditional gathering." "It's no intrusion," Owen assured her. "Quite the opposite. The men have been curious about our new guests, and Sunday dinner is as good a time as any for introductions." Flora chimed in from the stove. "It would do you good to socialize a bit, dear, and everyone's eager to meet little Alina. First baby born at the Broken Spur, you know." Put that way, Willow found it difficult to refuse. "Then we'd be honored to join you, thank you." Owen nodded, looking pleased. "That's settled then." He glanced down at Alina, who had fallen asleep in his arms, her tiny fingers still wrapped around his. "Looks like someone's worn out from all this excitement." "Here," Willow said, setting aside her work and standing. "Let me take her. She'll sleep for a while now, and I can put her down upstairs." Owen carefully transferred Alina back to her mother's arms, his fingers brushing against Willow's in the process. The brief contact sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I should get back to work," Owen said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "We're moving cattle to the north pasture today, and Hank will be wondering where I've got to." He retrieved his hat, nodded a farewell to both women, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused, turning back to Willow. "It's good to have you both here," he said simply. Then he was gone, the screen door closing softly behind him. Willow stood for a moment, Alina sleeping peacefully in her arms, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, certainly. Confusion about her future, without question. But there was something else. Something that felt dangerously like the beginnings of attachment. "That man," Flora said, breaking into her thoughts, "has been alone too long. It does my heart good to see him smiling like that." Willow didn't reply, but as she carried Alina upstairs, she couldn't help reflecting that she, too, had been alone even when she was supposedly part of a marriage. The thought was unsettling, a reminder of how completely she had misjudged Thomas and her future with him. She wouldn't make the same mistake twice, no matter how kind Owen Vaughn's eyes or how gentle his hands with her daughter. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed designed for gatherings and celebration. Willow woke early, a combination of Alina's demands and her own nervous anticipation of the day ahead. After attending to her daughter's needs, Willow spent more time than usual on her own appearance. The blue dress she'd worn for her first dinner with Owen had been freshly laundered and pressed by Flora, who had also loaned her a simple but pretty cameo brooch to fasten at the collar. "It was my mother's," Flora had explained the evening before. "Nothing fancy, but it adds a touch of elegance." Willow arranged her hair carefully, twisting it into a more elaborate style than she'd attempted since arriving at the Broken Spur. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand was still pale from her ordeal, still carrying the softness that came with childbirth, but there was a clarity in her eyes that had been missing during her final months with Thomas. "What do you think, Eleanor?" she asked her daughter, who was awake and alert in the small cradle Owen had mysteriously produced on their third day at the ranch. "Will we do?" Eleanor kicked her feet in what Willow chose to interpret as approval. Gathering her courage and her daughter, Willow made her way downstairs. The house was already bustling with activity, the sounds and smells of Flora's preparations filling every corner. The kitchen was a whirlwind of organized chaos, with dishes being prepared, tables being set up in the yard under the shade of an enormous cottonwood tree, and Flora directing it all like a general commanding troops. "There you are," Flora greeted her, barely looking up from the pot she was stirring. "You look lovely, dear. Owen's outside helping the men set up the tables. Why don't you take Eleanor out for some fresh air? The guests won't start arriving for another hour or so." Willow nodded, secretly relieved to escape the kitchen's frantic energy. She stepped out onto the porch, blinking in the bright sunlight. The yard had been transformed since her brief tour earlier in the week. Long tables covered with white cloths stood in the dappled shade of the cottonwood, while benches and chairs had been arranged to accommodate what looked to be a substantial gathering. Owen was indeed directing the operation, his voice carrying across the yard as he instructed two young men, presumably the new hands Flora had mentioned, on the proper placement of the final table. He wore a clean white shirt with a string tie, his usual work pants replaced by darker trousers that had seen an iron. His copper hair caught the sunlight, and even from a distance, Willow could see he'd taken extra care with his appearance today. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, a smile breaking across his face when he spotted her on the porch. He said something to the men, then made his way toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. "Good morning," he greeted her, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "You look—" He seemed to search for an appropriate word. "Well," he finished, somewhat lamely. Willow couldn't help but smile at his awkwardness. "Thank you, so do you." Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of self-consciousness. Clean, at least. Flora insisted. His gaze shifted to Eleanor. "And how's our little lady this morning?" "Curious about everything," Willow replied, looking down at her daughter, who was indeed studying the world around her with wide eyes. "She slept well last night, nearly 4 hours at one stretch." "A record," Owen noted, clearly remembering their conversations about Eleanor's frequent night wakings. "She's settling in, then." The implication that the Broken Spur was becoming home to both of them hung in the air, unaddressed but impossible to ignore. "Flora suggested we might enjoy some fresh air before the guests arrive," Willow said, changing the subject slightly. "Though I'm not sure where would be best to sit without being in the way." "Here," Owen said immediately, indicating a wooden bench positioned against the side of the house, partially shaded by the porch overhang. "You'll be able to see everything from there, but you can retreat inside easily if it gets to be too much." His thoughtfulness touched her. "Perfect, thank you." Owen helped her settle on the bench, making sure she was comfortable before reluctantly stepping back. "I should finish helping the boys. Hank will be bringing the rest of the men up from the bunkhouse soon, and nothing's ever quite ready enough for his standards." Willow nodded her understanding. "Don't let us keep you. We're quite content to watch the preparations." For the next hour, Willow observed the transformation of the Broken Spur from working ranch to social gathering place. More men appeared, weather-beaten, hard-working cowboys who removed their hats and nodded respectfully in her direction before turning to their assigned tasks. Flora emerged periodically from the kitchen, bearing platters of food that made Willow's mouth water just from their aroma. Around midday, the first wagon arrived, bringing a family from a neighboring ranch, the Hendersons, as Owen introduced them. Mrs. Henderson, a plump, cheerful woman with graying brown hair, immediately took a seat beside Willow, cooing over a leaner and sharing stories of her own 5 children, now mostly grown. "It's so wonderful to have a baby at the Broken Spur at last," she confided, as if Owen weren't standing just a few feet away. "This place has needed a woman's touch and a child's laughter for far too long." Before Willow could formulate a response that wouldn't imply a permanence to her situation that didn't exist, more guests arrived, and Mrs. Henderson moved on to greet old friends. Soon the yard was filled with neighbors from surrounding homesteads and ranches, a collection of families and individuals who formed the tight-knit community of this isolated corner of Nebraska. Willow found herself the center of much kind attention. The women especially gathered around her, admiring a leaner, offering advice and support with the easy familiarity of those who understood the challenges of frontier motherhood. No one asked directly about her circumstances or the absence of a husband, though Willow suspected Flora or Owen had shared some version of her story in advance to prevent awkward questions. When it came time to eat, Owen appeared at her side, offering his arm to escort her to a place of honor at the head table. The gesture was formal, almost courtly, and Willow felt the eyes of the gathering upon them as she accepted his assistance. "Everyone's been very kind," she murmured as they walked toward the table. "They're good people," Owen replied. "Salt of the earth, out here we look after our own." There it was again, that subtle inclusion of her and a leaner in the fabric of this community. Willow wondered if Owen realized what he was implying, or if the sentiment came so naturally to him that he didn't consider its implications. The meal was a feast by frontier standards: roast beef, chicken, an array of vegetables from Flora's garden, fresh bread, and 3 different kinds of pie for dessert. Conversation flowed easily around the tables, a mixture of ranch business, local gossip, and good-natured teasing. Willow found herself drawn into discussions of the coming harvest, the price of cattle, and the recent arrival of a new schoolteacher in the nearest town. "You should meet her," Mrs. Henderson said earnestly. "Miss Parker. Lovely young woman, very educated. She's organizing a lending library for the community." "That sounds wonderful," Willow replied sincerely. During her marriage to Thomas, books had been one of the few luxuries she'd insisted on bringing west, only to have most of them left behind with her on that fateful day in the field. "I've always loved reading." "Were you a teacher before your marriage, Mrs. Walters?" asked Mr. Peterson, an elderly farmer seated across from her. "Not formally," Willow answered, "but I did help in my father's school back in Illinois. He was the schoolmaster in our town." This revelation seemed to increase the interest of those around her, and Willow found herself fielding questions about her education and teaching experience. She was explaining her father's methods for teaching arithmetic when she became aware of Owen watching her, an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher. "Is something wrong?" she asked when there was a lull in the conversation. "Not at all," he assured her. "It's just—" "You never mentioned you were a teacher." "As I said, not formally," Willow clarified, "but I did enjoy it. Children are such eager learners when given the chance." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, a thought or idea that he seemed to consider sharing before thinking better of it. Instead, he simply nodded and turned his attention back to his plate. As the afternoon progressed, Willow found herself genuinely enjoying the company and conversation. Eleanor was passed carefully from one admiring woman to another, allowing Willow brief moments of freedom to stretch her legs and engage more fully with the guests. She was standing near the porch, deep in conversation with Mrs. Henderson about preserving vegetables for winter, when she overheard a snippet of conversation from two men leaning against the corral fence nearby. "Sure took me by surprise," one was saying, a weathered cowboy Willow recognized as Hank, Owen's foreman. "Never figured the boss for the type to take in strays, especially not a woman and baby." "You didn't see her when he brought her in," the other man replied, the ranch cook, if Willow remembered correctly. "Half dead and that baby coming fast. What else could he do? Could have taken her to town to the doctors," Hank pointed out. "Wouldn't be the first time he went out of his way to help someone in trouble. But bringing her here to the ranch house, that's different. You think he's sweet on her?" the cook asked, lowering his voice further. Hank snorted. "Hard to say with the boss, keeps his thoughts to himself. But I've seen the way he looks at her and that baby. Like they're something precious." Willow felt her cheeks flush and turned away quickly, pretending she hadn't heard. But the men's words echoed in her mind, adding a new layer of complexity to her already confused feelings about her situation. Was Owen developing feelings for her? And if he was, what did that mean for her future, for Alina's future? As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, guests started to depart, wagons and riders dispersing back to their own homesteads before darkness fell. Willow found herself on the porch once more, Alina sleeping in her arms, watching as Owen bid farewell to the last of the visitors. "Well," he said, climbing the steps to join her after the final wagon had disappeared down the lane, "what did you think of your first Broken Spur Sunday dinner?" "It was lovely," Willow answered honestly. "Everyone was so welcoming. You've built not just a ranch here, Owen, but a community." He leaned against the porch railing, his profile gilded by the setting sun. "Not just me. Everyone out here depends on each other. Has to be that way, this far from civilization." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the ranch hands cleared the tables under Flora's supervision. "Willow," Owen began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Her heart quickened, Hank's words about Owen's feelings coming back to her. "Yes, I've been thinking about your teaching experience," he said, surprising her. "The settlement's growing fast and the school in town is already overcrowded. Some of the outlying families can't send their children that far each day, especially the younger ones." This wasn't at all what she'd expected. "I see. There's been talk of starting a small school for the children in this area," Owen continued. "Nothing fancy, just basic education closer to home. When you mentioned helping your father teach, it got me thinking. Understanding dawned. You're suggesting I might teach at this new school?" Owen nodded, turning to face her fully. "It would be a position with respect, independence, a way for you to support yourself and Alina." He hesitated. "If you decide to stay in these parts, that is." The offer stunned her. It was practical, thoughtful, and completely unexpected. More than that, it represented something Willow had thought lost forever when Thomas abandoned her, a future with dignity and purpose. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, looking down at Alina's sleeping face. "It's a generous suggestion." "You don't have to decide now," Owen assured her. "It's just something to consider. The school wouldn't start until after harvest anyway, so there's time." Time. The word hung between them, laden with unspoken questions. How long would she stay at the Broken Spur? What came after her recovery? Where would she and Alina go if not here? "Thank you," Willow said finally, "for thinking of me, for everything." Owen's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped, returning to the porch railing instead. "You don't need to thank me, Willow. Having you and Alina here, it's been good for the ranch, good for me." The simple admission, spoken without flourish or expectation, touched something deep within her. Unlike Thomas's grand declarations and empty promises, Owen's quiet words rang with sincerity. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, Willow found herself reconsidering what moving on might actually mean. Perhaps it wasn't about physical distance at all, but about leaving behind the pain and betrayal of the past to embrace whatever future might be waiting, even if that future was right here at the Broken Spur. Summer gave way to early autumn on the Nebraska plains, the golden grass of the prairie taking on russet tones as September yielded to October. Eleanor, now 3 months old, had changed from the tiny, fragile newborn Willow had cradled in that sun-baked field to a robust, smiling infant who delighted in her surroundings and the people who populated her small world. And Willow herself had changed too, healing not just in body but in spirit. The raw wound of Thomas's betrayal had not disappeared, but it had scabbed over, the acute pain dulling to an occasional ache that surfaced less frequently with each passing day. Life at the Broken Spur had settled into a rhythm that both surprised and comforted her. Mornings were devoted to Eleanor and household tasks that Willow had gradually taken on, insisting to Flora that she needed to contribute to the running of the home that had sheltered her. Afternoons often found her helping with the mending, preserving the late summer harvest, or, increasingly, poring over books Owen had procured from town texts on teaching methods, arithmetic, and history that would help her prepare for the small school they were planning to establish after the new year. The idea had gained traction quickly among the neighboring families. A disused cabin on the edge of the Broken Spur property was being renovated for the purpose, with parents contributing labor and materials according to their means. Willow's initial hesitation had given way to genuine excitement as the project took shape, offering her a future she could never have imagined when Thomas drove away, leaving her to what should have been certain death. This particular October morning found Willow in the kitchen, Eleanor contentedly playing with a wooden rattle on a blanket spread nearby. Flora was in town for the day, visiting her daughter, which left Willow in charge of the household, a responsibility she took seriously. She was just sliding a batch of bread into the oven when the back door opened, and Owen stepped in, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. This had become another part of the rhythm of her days, Owen coming in from the morning's work, sometimes for a cup of coffee, sometimes just to check on her and Eleanor before returning to his duties. "Something smells good," he observed, hanging his hat on its customary peg. Willow smiled, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Fresh bread, and I've put on a pot of stew for dinner." Owen nodded his approval, then crouched down beside Eleanor's blanket. "And how's our girl this morning?" he asked, offering his finger for Eleanor to grasp, a game that never failed to delight the baby, our girl. The casual possessive no longer startled Willow as it once had. Over the past months, Owen had become an unexpected constant in Eleanor's life and in hers. He wasn't demonstrative in the way Thomas had been, with grand gestures and flowery compliments. Instead, his care showed itself in 1,000 small ways. A rocking chair that appeared in her bedroom, books that addressed her interests, quiet conversations on the porch after Eleanor was asleep. "She's been trying to roll over," Willow reported, watching as Eleanor gurgled happily at Owen's attention. "Not quite managing it yet, but she's determined." "Takes after her mother that way," Owen said, the compliment offered so naturally that Willow felt her cheeks warm. He stood, moving to the washbasin to clean his hands. "I've got news from town. Carpenter says the schoolhouse will be ready by Christmas, right on schedule." Willow's heart quickened at the reminder of her future role. "That's wonderful. I've been working through the arithmetic text you brought, and I think I've developed a good plan for teaching different levels together." Owen leaned against the counter, watching her with a slight smile. "You've taken to this idea better than I hoped. When I first suggested it, I wasn't sure you'd be interested." "It feels right," Willow admitted. "Using my education, contributing to the community." She hesitated, then added softly, "Building a life here." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, hope perhaps, or relief. "Then you're planning to stay? Beyond the opening of the school, I mean." It was the question that had hovered between them for months, never directly addressed until now. Willow took a deep breath, aware that her answer would change everything. "Yes," she said simply, "if we're still welcome." "You will always be welcome at the Broken Spur," Owen replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Owen took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it, running a hand through his hair in that now familiar gesture of uncertainty. Willow, whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by a commotion outside, the sound of horses approaching at speed, men's voices raised in urgent calls. Owen's expression shifted immediately from tender vulnerability to alert concern. "Stay here," he instructed, already moving toward the door. "Keep Elena inside." Willow nodded, crossing quickly to gather her daughter from the blanket. Through the kitchen window she could see several riders entering the yard, one slumped forward in his saddle, supported by another. For the next hour, the Broken Spur was a flurry of activity as Owen and his men tended to the injured rider, one of the hands from the Peterson place, thrown from his horse while checking fence lines. Flora's absence meant that Willow was pressed into service, boiling water, preparing bandages, and eventually helping Owen clean and stitch a nasty gash on the young man's forehead. "You've got a steady hand," Owen observed as she tied off the final stitch, the wounded cowboy mercifully unconscious thanks to a healthy dose of whiskey. "My father believed everyone should know basic medical care," Willow explained, wiping blood from her fingers with a damp cloth. "Living on the frontier means being prepared for emergencies." Owen nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Willow agreed, a pang of homesickness washing over her. She hadn't allowed herself to think much about her family back in Illinois, knowing the pain it would bring. "I wish he could have met Elena." "Why can't he?" Owen asked. "Once the weather improves in spring, there's no reason you couldn't take the train east for a visit." The suggestion took Willow by surprise. "I hadn't considered, I assumed." "That you were trapped here." Owen's voice was gentle without accusation. "Willow, I hope you know that you're free to come and go as you please. This isn't a prison and you're not beholden to me or anyone else." The statement, meant to reassure, instead brought tears to Willow's eyes. How different from Thomas, who had viewed her as a possession, discardable when inconvenient. Owen was offering her not just shelter and safety, but freedom, the dignity of choice. "Thank you," she managed, blinking rapidly to clear her vision, "for understanding what that means to me." Before Owen could respond, the injured cowboy stirred, groaning as he returned to consciousness. The moment between them passed as they turned their attention to their patient, but Willow felt something fundamental had shifted, some final barrier between them dissolving in the afternoon light. Later that evening, after the excitement had died down and the Peterson hand had been transported home in a wagon, Willow sat on the porch, enjoying the crisp autumn air. Elena was asleep inside, the household quiet save for the creaking of the rocking chair where Willow sat, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. The sound of boots on the steps alerted her to Owen's approach. He'd been in the barn, checking on a mare due to foal any day, and now he joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers. "Peaceful evening," he observed, his voice low in deference to the quiet surrounding them. Willow agreed. "Hard to believe it's the same day that started with baking bread and ended with stitching up cowboys." Owen chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering darkness. "Life on a ranch never predictable." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Willow found herself acutely aware of Owen, beside her the steady rhythm of his breathing, the subtle scent of leather and hay that always seemed to accompany him, the solid, reassuring presence that had become such an integral part of her world. "Willow," he said finally, her name almost a sigh on his lips. "There's something I need to say to you, something I've been wanting to say for a while now." Her heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes." Owen shifted in his chair to face her, his features half illuminated by the light spilling from the window behind them. "When I found you that day in that field, I had no idea how completely you and Elena would change my life. This ranch. It was just a place before, a holding." Something I'd built because I needed to build something after the war left me with nothing but ghosts." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But these past months with you both here, it's become something else, something more, a home." Willow's throat tightened with emotion. "It's become that for us too." "I don't want to rush you," Owen continued carefully. "I know you're still healing from what Thomas did, and I know that trusting another man, especially with your future and Alina's, isn't something you do lightly." "No," Willow agreed softly, "it isn't. But I need you to know how I feel." Owen's voice took on a note of determination, as if he'd made a decision and would see it through. "I love you, Willow. I love Alina as if she were my own, and if you need more time, I'll wait. If you need reassurance, I'll provide it. Whatever you need to believe that my feelings are genuine and lasting." The declaration, so simply and honestly delivered, brought fresh tears to Willow's eyes. There was no grand gesture, no flowery language, just the unvarnished truth, offered without expectation. "Owen," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "when Thomas left me in that field, I thought my life was over. Not just because of the physical danger, but because I'd built my entire future around a man who proved to be as insubstantial as a mirage." She took a deep breath, steeling herself to be equally honest. "I was afraid to trust again, afraid to believe that anyone could value me for myself, not just for what I could provide or how I fit into their plans." Owen remained silent, giving her the space to continue. "But you've shown me, day after day, what real caring looks like. It's in the way you hold Alina, the way you ask about my day, the way you've helped me build a future here without ever making me feel indebted." Willow reached out, finding his hand in the darkness. "I love you too, Owen. I think I have for a long time, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." His fingers tightened around hers, warm and strong. "I would never hurt you, Willow, never abandon you or Alina. That's a promise I'll spend the rest of my life keeping if you'll let me." In the quiet of the autumn evening, with the vastness of the prairie stretching around them and the solid reality of the broken spur beneath their feet, Willow made her choice not out of desperation or necessity, but from a place of strength and certainty. "I believe you," she said simply. "And I accept your promise with one of my own, to build this life, this home with you, together." Owen stood, drawing her to her feet and into his embrace. His arms encircled her with the same gentle strength he'd shown that first day, when he'd lifted her from the field where Thomas had left her to die. But this time, instead of unconsciousness claiming her, Willow was fully, vibrantly aware as Owen's lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his voice husky with emotion. "I never thought I'd find this a family, a true home. When I promised you shelter that day, I had no idea you'd end up sheltering me just as much." Willow smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. They had saved each other in ways that went far beyond physical rescue. And in doing so, they had found something neither had dared to hope for. A love built not on grand dreams or desperate need, but on the solid foundation of respect, shared purpose, and genuine care. As they stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home, Willow thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain and betrayal, the fear and uncertainty. All of it had led to this moment, this man, this future stretching before them like the endless Nebraska sky. Thomas had abandoned her, believing her a burden too heavy to bear. But Owen had lifted not just her child, but her spirit, promising shelter and delivering so much more. A love strong enough to weather whatever storms might come, as enduring as the land itself. The seasons turned, marking the rhythm of life on the broken spur with their distinct cadences. Winter brought snow that transformed the prairie into a vast white sea, broken only by the dark outlines of the ranch buildings and the distant smudge of tree lines along creek beds. The schoolhouse was completed just before Christmas, as promised. A snug one-room building with a pot-bellied stove, sturdy desks crafted by local carpenters, and windows positioned to catch the winter light. Willow stood in the empty schoolhouse on the day after Christmas, Owen beside her, Alina bundled against the cold in his arms. The baby, now nearly 6 months old, watched with wide eyes as her mother moved about the space, arranging books on shelves and testing the new slate board that hung on the front wall. "It's perfect," Willow declared, running her hand along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. "Better than I could have imagined. The children will be here in 2 weeks," Owen reminded her, bouncing Alina gently when she began to fuss. 15 of them, according to the latest count. "Are you nervous?" Willow considered the question honestly. "A little, but mostly excited." "This feels right, Owen, like I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do." His smile warmed her more effectively than the fire crackling in the stove. "You were born to teach, that's plain to see. These children are fortunate to have you, and I'm fortunate to have this opportunity." Willow crossed to him, taking Alina and pressing a kiss to her daughter's rosy cheek. "To have both of you." Owen's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. "I've been thinking," he began, a note in his voice that Willow had come to recognize as preceding something important. "About us, about the future." "Oh," she prompted when he fell silent. "I know we've discussed waiting until spring, but—" He took a deep breath. "Willow Walters, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife before the new year?" The proposal, though not unexpected given their declarations of love months earlier, still took her breath away with its timing. "So soon." "But why? Because I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife," Owen interrupted, his voice fervent. "Because I want Alina to have my name when she grows up. Because I want the whole territory to know that you and she are my family now and always." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen Vaughn. I will marry you before the new year." His kiss was gentle but thorough, mindful of Alina between them but leaving no doubt of the depth of his feelings. When they parted, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "After the war, after everything. I thought the best I could hope for was a good ranch, maybe some respect from my neighbors. But you and Alina, you've given me so much more." Willow understood completely. She, too, had resigned herself to less than this, to a marriage based on practicality rather than love, to a life defined by someone else's dreams rather than her own. Thomas's abandonment, cruel as it had been, had ultimately freed her to find a deeper, truer connection than she'd ever imagined possible. "We should head back," she said, noting the lowering sun outside the schoolhouse windows. "Flora will be wondering where we've got to, and this little one needs her dinner." Owen nodded, helping her gather her things and extinguishing the stove before locking up the schoolhouse. The journey back to the main house was short but bracing in the winter cold, Alina's complaints growing more insistent as they went. "Someone's got her mother's determination," Owen observed as they stamped snow from their boots on the porch. Willow laughed, unwrapping Alina from her multiple layers as they entered the warmth of the house. "And her father's impatience when hungry." The casual reference to Owen as Alina's father, something that had been becoming more natural in recent weeks, brought a smile to his face that outshone the winter sun. Flora, informed of their decision to marry before the new year, threw herself into preparations with characteristic energy. The wedding would be small by necessity, given the season and the scattered nature of the community, but no less meaningful for its intimacy. 3 days later, on the last day of December 1873, Willow stood before the hearth in the Broken Spur's main room, her hands clasped in Owen's, as the circuit-riding preacher who had fortuitously arrived that morning pronounced them husband and wife. Alina, resplendent in a christening gown that had once belonged to Flora's youngest daughter, watched from the arms of Mrs. Henderson, her solemn gaze fixed on her mother as if understanding the significance of the moment. "I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Owen Vaughn," the preacher announced to the small gathering of ranch hands, neighbors, and friends who had braved the winter weather to witness the union. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Owen's kiss was respectful but unmistakably possessive, claiming Willow as his wife before all present. When they turned to face their guests, Willow was struck by the rightness of it all, this man, this home, this life she had never planned but now couldn't imagine living without. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. Flora had outdone herself with the wedding supper, and even Hank, usually so taciturn, offered a toast to the couple that brought tears to more than one eye. "To the boss and his lady," the foreman said, raising his glass. "May your union be blessed with all the good things this life has to offer, and may the broken spur flourish under your care for generations to come." As evening deepened into night and the guests departed, Willow found herself standing once more on the porch with Owen, Eleanor sleeping peacefully inside under Flora's watchful eye. The vast sky above them was alive with stars, a canopy of light stretching from horizon to horizon. "Mrs. Vaughn," Owen murmured, drawing her close against the cold, "has a nice sound to it." "It does," Willow agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Though I think it will take some getting used to. We have time," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "All the time in the world." As they stood together, husband and wife at the threshold of a new year and a new life, Willow thought again of that sun-baked field where their story had begun. Thomas had seen her as a burden to be discarded. Owen had seen her as a precious gift to be cherished. The contrast could not have been more stark or more revelatory of the true nature of love. "Thank you," she whispered, turning in Owen's arms to face him, "for finding me that day, for keeping your promise." "Which promise was that?" he asked, though the tenderness in his eyes suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "Shelter and safety," Willow reminded him, "for both of us." Owen's smile was soft in the starlight. "That was the easiest promise I've ever made, and the one I'm most grateful to have kept." As their lips met in a kiss that held both passion and promise, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the shelter they had found in each other was more than physical protection from the elements or the dangers of the frontier. It was the shelter of true partnership, of shared dreams and mutual respect, of a love strong enough to weather whatever challenges lay ahead. In the years that followed, the broken spur flourished under their joint stewardship. The small school grew along with the community, eventually requiring a larger building and additional teachers. Eleanor was joined by siblings, first a brother, then twin sisters who filled the once quiet ranch house with laughter and activity. Thomas Walters was never heard from again, though rumors occasionally reached them of a man matching his description who had died in a saloon brawl in California, having never claimed the land he'd abandoned his pregnant wife to reach. Willow received the news with a moment of sadness for what might have been, but no regret for the path her life had taken. On summer evenings, when the work of the day was done and the children were finally asleep, Owen and Willow would often sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land that had brought them together. Sometimes they spoke of the future of their hopes for their children, their plans for the ranch, their dreams for the community they had helped to build. Sometimes they simply sat in the comfortable silence of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed most. And sometimes, on nights when the prairie grass rippled like a golden sea under the moon, Willow would remember that desperate young woman crying in a field, her world collapsing around her. She would remember the approach of a stranger on horseback, the strength of his arms as he lifted her from despair, the solemnity of his promise. On those nights, she would reach for Owen's hand, grateful beyond words for the man who had not only kept that promise but had expanded it into a lifetime of love, security, and joy. The broken spur had been well named something damaged made whole again through perseverance and care. Like the ranch that was their home, they too had been broken in their different ways, only to find in each other the healing they had never thought to find. And that, Willow knew, was the greatest shelter of all.